Hi everyone, my name is Sarah and this is my husband Tyler, and today we're going to show you how to make a Bob Ross inspired painting at an artist level and at a beginner level. So even if you're not an artist or you've never done a painting like this before, this is your shot to give it a try. And I want to help you guys see that even if you're a beginner, you can take tutorials like Bob Ross paintings from the guy we all know and love, and you can do it yourself at home. So we're going to be using acrylic paint, which is different than what he does on the show. He uses oil paint, which is a little more difficult. He uses some other supplies that can be trickier. So acrylic paint is something you guys will probably all have at home, and it's a little easier to use. So we're going to be working from season 14, episode 1, and it's called Distant Mountains, just in case you would like to watch the video yourself. So we'll link it in the description if you'd like to do that. So the supplies we're going to be using today are a small or medium-sized canvas, something like this, which you can get from Michael's or any craft store. We're going to use a paper plate, which is the easy version of a paint palette. I have a variety of paintbrushes and paint colors that we're going to use, and I'll show you guys which colors we end up using. You'll also need a palette knife, which is something like this. And it's more of an artist supply, but you can probably get it at any craft or art store. And this is important for a Bob Ross tutorial because he tends to use them a lot for creating different textures and working on mountains. So this is an important supply. And I've got a cup of water to wash our brushes. So we're going to get started watching the video and beginning our paintings, and I'm going to show you what Bob Ross does, and I'm going to use Tyler as an example to show you guys maybe a simpler or easier version if needed. So before I start, I'm going to make my canvas a little damp. So I could use a spray bottle, but I don't have one, so I just wet a paper towel, and I'm just going to make my canvas just a little bit damp, and that's going to help me blend my colors since I'm using acrylic paint. Bob Ross uses oils, so he starts with a base coat of white, and that's what helps his colors flow together. But you can achieve that with acrylic paint by just dampening your canvas. And you might need to re-dampen it throughout the process using a spray bottle or whatever you have, maybe a paintbrush, but just so you know, that helps the colors to blend. We're going to start with some dark blue. I'm going to start with a damp brush and then get a little bit onto my brush. And we're going to make the signature crisscross stroke. And this is just a way of blending color. So you make this nice crisscross shape as you move down your canvas, and it helps you to blend color so that it fades from dark to light. So I'm doing this little X shapes. And we're going to go about halfway down the canvas. Once you've blended it, you can move your brush back and forth to cover your brush strokes. Oops, sorry, I got a little on yours.
That's all right.
There we go. Nicely blended, so it's a little darker at the top and lighter as it goes down. Remember to dampen your brush. Start by covering the top. And then once you've covered that top area, then you can start moving down. So right now it looks like either your canvas or your brush is too dry. So let's take a look. Yeah, it looks like your canvas is a little dry. So I'll help you out. I'm going to take a little water and just add some water on there. If your paint is running, you can always wipe it up, and no worries, it can be covered up later. The easy part of acrylic paint is it dries pretty fast, and if you make a mistake, you can just paint over a part that you messed up. So we're totally fine. We re-wet our canvas. Now, make your brush a little more damp, and give it another shot. That's fine. Much better. Another thing is, you've got this wide brush, so you want to take advantage of the width. You want to make your X's using the brush, not like cutting with the side of it, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Go all the way across, long strokes. and working your way up. So that's just going to blend together the strokes that he already made. Now I'm going to add a little bit of a green or turquoise color to my palette. And we're going to mix this in with the blue that we already have, and that's going to give us more of a warm blue for our water in the painting. I'm going to use my palette knife as a mixing tool. It's really handy that way. And I'm just mixing that blue and turquoise together for us to use in the water. It's better to mix too much paint than not enough in case you run out of the exact color you need. So we've redampened our brushes, redampened our canvases, and now we're going to work on some water. So what you're going to do is grab a little bit of this turquoise blue color that's a little bit more green than our last one. And we're going to use strokes moving from the outside of the canvas in. We're going to do that on the left side and on the right side. And what this is going to do is make a more natural blend together, and it's going to create a highlight in the middle of our water. So it's going to look something like this. We're going to just make strokes like this, going about halfway across. And we only need to go about a little less than halfway up our canvas. So maybe about there. And remember, we are interpreting the video we're watching, so it never has to look exactly like you see. Now I'm going to do this side in the same way. Making strokes towards the middle. And it's okay if there's a little lighter space in the middle. So when you're done, it'll look something like that. And as I finish, I'm going to take a clean, dry brush. I just wiped mine off. And you're going to go over everything you just did really lightly and just blend it together a little bit. So as you're making your brush strokes, you should have the darkest area at the edge of the painting, and then as you drag it inward, it's going to get lighter as you kind of let up on the brush. So if you don't mind, I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to grab a little more paint, and we're going to start right at the edge and drag it in. Actually, I think your brush is a little dry. Can you grab the water? So we're going to get a little more water. Get our paint again. Let's try this again. There we go. You're going to make long strokes from the outside to the inside. Make sure you're not getting any dry patches of the canvas showing through. Great, so now that you've got your paint laid down, you're just going to soften those edges in the middle by blending over like we did, or like I showed you.
So do I fully go across?
Mm-hmm. You don't have to completely blend it in, it'll just soften it up a little bit. If your highlights there in the middle are just really stubborn, just grab the corner of that wet paper towel, and it might help you blend those out a little bit better. Our next step is going to be to add a few clouds to the top of the sky. So I'm going to add some white to my palette. And we're going to use a couple of smaller brushes for this part. So remember, my brush is damp. I'm going to pick up a little of that white paint. And you can paint your clouds wherever you want on your canvas. And we're going to do it by just moving that brush in little circular motions. And you want the top of your cloud to be kind of randomly placed. So it doesn't have to look like a cartoon cloud that you drew as a kid. It's going to look a little bit natural and random. So I'm going to place one right in there. I'm just swirling my brush around like this. I'm going to add another one up here, maybe a little smaller, just swirling my brush around. And remember, they don't have to look perfect. Clouds aren't perfect anyway. Once you finish that, you can take your same larger brush as before, and we're going to blend out the bottom of those clouds a little bit. I'm just going to soften up those edges along the bottom of the cloud and kind of blend it into the sky around it, just a little bit. Something like that. Remember, just hold your brush kind of loosely and just start rubbing it in little circular motions in a kind of a random cloud shape. That's good. It doesn't have to be like little donuts. Just kind of randomly move it around, up and down. Yeah, great. And remember, the top edge of your cloud, you want it to have kind of round little peaks and to kind of move up and down in a random way. You don't have to completely fill in the cloud. Like, you can leave a few little open spots where the light naturally comes through. Now I'm going to grab some black and I'm going to mix in a tiny bit of that white, maybe even a little bit of blue, just to soften it up a little bit. Generally, as a painter, you never use straight black. You always soften it up a little bit or mix it up using other colors. It's going to give it a more natural appearance. Okay, now's the fun part where we get to use our palette knives. So we're going to start by laying in the shape of a mountain line. So this is how to use a palette knife. Use the edge of it to scrape paint onto the surface of your canvas. So I'm going to take the black that I have laid out on here and grab my palette knife and just scrape that on there gently, just to pick up a little paint on the edge. And then this is where Bob Ross says we're making a big decision where to start laying in our mountain line. So this can be whatever shape you want, however you want to make it move across your page. So I'm going to have mine start somewhere right there. So you just use that palette knife to kind of scrape on the shape that you're going for. So I want mine to come down like this. Grab a little more paint. It can be a little tricky, but with some practice, a palette knife is really fun to use, and it helps you to lay in shapes like mountains that are kind of sharp more easily. So all we're doing is kind of choosing where we want the top of the mountain to go, and then scraping it down in diagonal strokes. Something like that. Okay, I think that's a good start. So just so you can see better what I'm doing, I've got my black paint laid out here, and I want the paint to go onto the back edge of my palette knife. So I'm going to hold it like this and just scrape it down a little bit. And now that paint is on the back edge, and I can scrape it down in the same way onto my canvas. Exactly. So one other thing is, you don't want it to look too mechanical, so it can also look just like with our clouds. It can look a little bit random and kind of meandering. So you don't want it to go in like even stair-step motions, you know what I mean? Now taking our larger brush again, we're just going to go along our mountain peaks and place your brush on it and then drag it out. You're going to drag it out, going along either side. And this is just going to soften the bottom edge of our mountains. Just softly blending out the bottom edge of those mountains, and even coming in and defining some of the areas of light and shadow, and kind of the direction that the mountain moves in. Okay, this part is really fun. We're going to add some highlights and shadows of snow on our mountains. So I'm going back into my white and doing that same thing where I pick up a little bit on the edge of my palette knife. But this time is different. We're not going to be pushing hard into the canvas. We're going to move it really lightly across the surface. So you're almost barely even touching it, and just you're going to drag it down. So the way we're going to do this is the highlight side of the mountain first. So I'm going to choose which side I want my highlight to be on. I think I'm going to do the left side. So on the left edges of all of my mountain shapes, wherever I imagine I want them to go, I'm going to take that white paint right on the edge of my palette knife and super lightly just drag it down. Something like that. And it's gonna look a little spotty and textured, and that's exactly what we're going for. Okay, I think I'm done with my highlights. So now for the shadow side of our mountains, we're gonna mix that white with a little bit of our blue. And this is gonna make a shadow color for that snow. It might seem like a small detail, but it makes your final product look a lot more dynamic. So with my light blue I just mixed up, I'm going to go into the other edge of the mountain on my right edge of those peaks, and using that light blue I'm going to lay in some little snow areas in the same way as I just did, super lightly. Now we're going to blend out the bottom edge of that mountain a little bit and make it look a little misty and light. So with a tiny bit of white paint on my brush, I'm just going to dab along the base of the mountains. Just dabbing my brush, and then I'm going to drag it up. Just like that. And that's going to add the illusion of a misty, kind of a haze along the bottom edge. You can always dab off a little bit if you make too much extra of that haze. Now we're going to use what I think is probably Bob Ross's favorite brush, a fan brush. So I've dipped my fan brush in black paint, just along the edges, and this is how we're going to start putting in some trees. So the way that we're going to do this is somewhere along the baseline of our mountain. We're going to start scrubbing in these trees with this fan brush. And the way you do it is you hold it vertically, up and down, and the edge of your fan brush is going to create the top of the points of the trees. So something like this. We're just going to dab our fan brush, going up and down, and creating that tree line. So you want to make some taller, some shorter, and we're just focusing on that top edge, making sure that looks right. And this is just an easy way to make it look like a lot of tiny little trees in the background. Now once I've laid in the general shape of my tree line, I'm going to take that large brush again, and we're going to decide the water line is going to be somewhere around the middle of that area of trees, and we're just going to start dragging it down. We're just going to lightly drag it down like this, and this is creating the look of a reflection in the water from that tree line. So just a quick drag down. And then just lightly going across. And that's going to blend it together really nicely. Really lightly brush across. Super light. You don't have to totally mess up what you do. That's good. Now we're going to take a little bit of green and yellow and dab that onto that same fan brush. Just getting some of both colors on there. And then we're going to dab those along the bottom edge of our tree line where the trees meet the water and the reflections. So right about in the middle. We're just going to do just kind of random dabs of that green and yellow. That's going to make a little bit of a line of grass. Now I've watered down a little bit of white to make it kind of runny, and we're going to use that to make some little tiny white lines where we've got our water line. Sounds so good. So right along the edge of those little green bits where our water would begin, just straight across horizontally, we can add a few little white lines. Now we're going to add a few big trees onto our painting. So you can choose where you'd like yours to be. I think I'm going to add mine along the right side of my canvas. And I think I'm going to add a few. So I'm going to start by using that same dark black mix of a color that we've used before. So the way he shows us how to start making a large tree is by figuring out where you want the top to be. So I'm going to make the top right here. Draw a little vertical line. And then you're going to start working your brush back and forth in kind of a zigzag pattern, but you're just moving it back and forth down the tree. And you're creating this body of the tree that gets slightly bigger and bigger as you move down. So I've gone most of the way down my page, and I think I'm going to make another larger tree right up here. I'm getting brave. So I'm going to make a line right here for the top of my tree, and then I'm going to start working my way down in that zigzag pattern, going back and forth to create the leaves and branches of my larger tree. In the video, Bob Ross used a fan brush, but I got tired of it, so I'm just using a tiny brush. So for the last step of our painting, we're going to create some dark bushes in the foreground here that our trees are going to be resting on. And there's actually more to the video that you can see if you look it up, but we decided to stop here for today, so ours is going to look a little bit more simple, and that's okay. You can always stop if you get tired of painting or if you like how it looks. You never have to follow somebody else's example to a T. It's your painting. So we're going to use our black color once again, and I'm just using that larger brush. I'm going to load it up with a lot of paint, and we're just going to create that bottom land line by just pushing that brush around in kind of random motions. That's going to create the appearance of bushes or leaves and shrubs right at the bottom of the page there. So we're going to fill that in at the bottom, and it's going to give the foreground some place to rest, and the trees a place to rest on. I'm pretty satisfied with that shape, so I'm going to hand the brush off to you for your last step. Okay, I think that's it, and we're finished with our paintings. So make sure you wash out your brushes as soon as you're done. It's important to clean your brushes throughout your painting process, and especially at the end, because you don't want the paint to dry on in there. Okay, I think we are finished. I think we did really well, especially yours as a total beginner. I think this is Tyler's first painting ever of his life. So I think that was pretty good. Thank you, Tyler, for your help and for trying this out. And we would love if you guys try this out too, and if you do, make sure to show us on Milton Public Library's Facebook page. Bye, guys!
Bye.